Coming up on Digital Music Trends 201 on the 17th of September 2014, Clear Channel becomes iHeartMedia, the controversy around U2's release of Songs of Innocence continues, Jay-Z speaks out around samples and copyright law, I chat with the CMO of Deezer North America about the new Elite product, we discuss Alt-J's app for the new album, This Is All Yours, which is based on geolocation, and finally we discuss Facebook's moves in the video space and Pandora's latest hire as the company looks to build a stronger relationship with artists. This week's show is brought to you by Play MPE. Check out daily.plaympe.com for the latest Play MPE releases, charts, news and more. And head to plaympe.com for more information on the company. We thank them for their support of Digital Music Trends. Hello everyone and welcome to Digital Music Trends. I'm Andrea Leonelli and this is the weekly show where we talk about and try to make sense of the latest news in the digital music industry. And DMT is available on a wide range of devices. You can find it on pretty much any streaming service that streams podcasts and the like. You can find it on YouTube, SoundCloud, Mixcloud, Spreaker, Stitcher, Tuning Radio. And if you like downloading the show and having it on your phone, you can get the Podcast or Downcast apps from iOS or the Dog Catcher app on Android, and you can get the shows for free right on your handset. And if you'd like to receive a weekly mail out, check out bit.ly/DMT list and you'll get a weekly email telling you what we've been working on every week and what kind of shows we've been producing. So this week it's a real pleasure to have two great guests back on the show. And first of all, Kristelia Garcia in her new role as Associate Professor at the University of Colorado Law and Director of Silicon Flatiron Center for Law and Tech. So hi Kristelia, and thanks for joining me. I'm losing my breath. How's it going?
Hi, I'm doing very well. That was very fast and impressive. I'm well, thank you. Settling in nicely to Boulder and happy to be back on the show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And I'd love to hear your impressions around Boulder. I know some people that absolutely love the area, so it's cool to see you've moved there. And then we have Darren Hemmings. Always wonderful to have you back. Founder of digital marketing agency Motive Unknown. If you don't know about them, go and check out motiveunknown.com and subscribe to the Daily Digest. So hi Darren, thanks for joining me. How's it going?
Good, yeah. It's good to be back. I'm loving this. It's nice. I can just sit and talk and relax for a bit.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Welcome.
Exactly. It's all very chill today. We have a few interesting bits of news, but nothing major like last week. So there's no sort of frenzy of trying to cover everything. We'll cover as much as we can, and it should be a good show. And there's actually, I wanted to start by talking about a fresh piece of news that came out in the past 24 hours or so. But I thought it was quite interesting. So Clear Channel has just announced a major rebrand. It will be now called iHeartMedia. So that brand name is going to encompass all its properties essentially, and comprising 859 radio stations in over 150 markets, reaching 245 million listeners per month. And in addition, iHeartMedia Digital has more than 90 million digital monthly uniques. So this all seems to come from the success of iHeartRadio and the fact that the company, the group wanted to consolidate around that iHeart brand. And this is interesting from two sides. From the consumer side, because it brings together a variety of different offerings that perhaps were a bit disparate before, and it were hard to see as connected. And also from an advertising perspective, because it means that Clear Channel is probably thinking about consolidating some of the advertising inventory offers in order to be able to provide more comprehensive solutions to advertisers as well on that front. And so, what do you think? It's an interesting move. It's a big move for something that sounds as corporate as Clear Channel to move into being called iHeartMedia. So, Darren, what are your thoughts?
It makes sense to me, to be honest. I mean, Clear Channel was a sort of fairly anodyne kind of, advertising network originally that's grown out, so it feels like a sort of sensible move, really. Clear Channel, when it was in its original incarnation, was probably a decent name, if not a remarkable one. And I suppose with this brand, it's definitely a bit fluffier, isn't it? It's kind of nicer, and it's the Comic Sans font of names. It's it's kind of sweet and digestible. But that makes sense, and I think at a time when particularly large corporate networks are getting very much painted as, behemoths, when they come with a slightly softer name and approach, it makes a lot of sense. So, I think it's a shrewd move. It gives them a chance to refresh as well. They've got a huge amount of properties, and as you point out, they're pulling that stuff together under the one kind of banner, and may allow them to Unite Properties connect things a little bit more. All of which, to me, from an outside perspective looking in, just makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristelia, from your side, of course, in the US, this affects US consumers more than consumers around the world, in the sense that Clear Channel's got a huge presence there. What do you think people will make of this move? Of course, Clear Channel is a well-established name in the States now.
Sure. Well, I think that it is considered a big deal over here. I think that, as Darren alluded to, this largely comes from the fact that Clear Channel is trying to, rebrand itself in a way. For the last almost 50 years, it had started off as a billboard advertising company. They've begun, as we've seen, and I've written about this, become increasingly interested in digital. Starting with iHeartMedia and making moves as they did with Taylor Swift recently, where they started paying terrestrial performance rates and so forth. I think the interviews that I've seen with Bob Pittman said specifically, like, we were tired of going into meetings and telling the people, hey, we want something fresh and new, and we're Clear Channel, and then being like, So they're hoping, honestly, to get, a better reaction, like, we're iHeartMedia, however kind of cheesy we might think the name is. It's their attempt to say, we're young and hip, or we wish we were, and can you give us something fresh to work with?
Yeah.
I think from a consumer standpoint here, the name is encouraging insofar as it reflects a commitment to digital.
Yeah.
They're no dummies, right? Or they wouldn't be such a behemoth company. They know that the writing is on the wall, and digital where it's at going forward. And I think the name change indicates for us a commitment to investment in that direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm excited about that, because I've said it on the show before, but the fact that iHeartRadio is probably one of the first and the biggest proponent of personalized radios that comprise both spoken word content and personalized music content, and allow consumers to pick and choose programs and pick and choose what kind of artists they want to listen to. It's kind of, that's where I think that technology should be heading towards, and offering that flexibility to consumers, and nobody really else has thought about this in a comprehensive way as much as iHeartRadio has. Pandora doesn't produce any content, Spotify doesn't produce any content. They can't offer this unless they do deals with third-party content producers. So, yeah, exciting for me. I think we'll see. What happens with that. And of course, we have to keep talking about YouTube. I mean, there's no getting away from it. Last week, it already felt like an old story, less than 24 hours out of the gates, but the ball has kept on rolling, and we've heard a lot more around the YouTube Songs of Innocence release. If you haven't heard about this, it's very unlikely, but essentially Apple released YouTube's album to over 500 million iTunes consumers, and dropping it into their library essentially without a warning or asking for permission, and this led to a lot of grumblings from consumers. Also, of course, some consumers are really happy about it, but essentially the problem is that if you had set up your iPhone to download any purchase you'd made on the iTunes Store, then this would classify as a purchase, essentially, and it would download automatically to your phone whether you wanted it or not, which is kind of seen almost like an invasion of privacy, or the musical privacy of consumers anyway. We heard grumblings from label executives about this being bad for the industry because it was distributed for free. We heard from ERA, of course, the Entertainment Retail Association, they're not happy about this because it's, and they class it as damaging as piracy. And most of all, we've seen complaints from users that essentially led Apple to release a tool to get rid of this album if you didn't want it in the first place. So, Kristelia, you had some interesting thoughts around this and around how this could be perceived by consumers, because it was completely, it was done without their consent, and it was just added.
Yeah. So I guess I should start by saying, this has got to be the hashtag first world problems, right? Where people complain that we got something free on our iPhone 6s, So I preface the whole discussion with, I'm embarrassed that we're talking about this.
Right.
That said, I think that, regardless of how you feel about U2 as a band, or even about the new album in particular, for me, from a privacy law perspective, what's really interesting about this is basically what Apple did here. And it's an interesting move from a company who's dealt with some interesting PR issues. What this really did was it reminded consumers of something that they like to forget, which is that, Apple has this sort of godlike presence, and they can see what you're doing, and they can do things to something that belongs to you, right? They can put something on something that's yours. And I think what that does is it kind of jostles people, because in the back of their minds, they know, of course, apps get updated and, Apple can put things into libraries, but we're all a little bit, icky and uncomfortable with that concept. And so when it actually happens, it sort of serves as this, not so subtle reminder, oh, by the way, Apple can do whatever it wants. And here's an example of something that it can do, including when you complain loud enough, it can give you a button to take it off. So I think that a lot of this has more to do with a reminder that as attached as we are to our smartphones and our other, wired devices, it comes with a trade-off. And this is an example of that type of a trade-off. And who knows, maybe this strategically was something Apple was doing to remind people so that later when something bigger happens, they won't pretend they didn't know this was a possibility. As far as, the complaints about this, vis-a-vis the music industry, I sympathize with the concerns that this only reinforces a lack of value of music. That said, I suspect that the free ship has sailed. I don't know that we're going to go back and convince people that music can't be gotten for free, because at this point, most people know that it can. The cultural issue is whether it should be, and people who want to pay will pay, and people who don't won't. It may be that people will go back and appreciate U2 anew and go back and buy some stuff from the catalog. I don't know. Perhaps that's a thought. I suspect for U2 who care less about album sales at this point, it's more publicity for the new album coming out, maybe pick up a couple of new fans interested in their catalog. So I don't even know if from a management standpoint it was a bad move for you two. From my perspective, the more interesting move was sort of the reminder of Apple's control and our thin veil of perceived privacy that may or may not be real.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with you there that I think this move has hurt Apple more than it's hurt you too. Darren, you've written quite a bit about this on the Digest as well. What are your thoughts around the whole issue?
My first thought is I'm so sick of talking about it.
I know, it's only a week old, but it feels like it's been around for a year, right?
Oh, Jesus. Funny enough, I wrote the digest earlier because obviously we're going to probably, it goes out in a little while, and actually added a thing at the top that said certified Bono free because I'm bored of having included stories for the last 7 days. Yeah. But not to appear ungrateful on your show, of course. I'm sitting moaning. No, I think, there's a few angles to this. I mean, I think, there's a lot of people sort of weighing in to give their, moan and the ERA thing just seemed like they were just sore at not having the opportunity to sell a U2 album and spat the dummy, really, in the way in which it was done, to be honest. I don't really think reflected very well on the Entertainment Retailers Association because it was just so patently them being, sore about not getting the record. And so they use very strong language and all of these sorts of things, and saying it's sort of equivalent to piracy and everything is, come on, guys, it's not. Let's not get silly now. Relative to the, I think Kristelia kind of covered the privacy aspect and what that flags up with Apple devices. Which you can almost boil down to it just feeling a bit creepy. Mercifully, I don't own an Apple device, so this has been a glorious week to not be on the receiving end of dross from U2. But I think the bigger thing for me is always kind of, with all these bands, it's talked about, I was talking about this to somebody yesterday, and they're saying, well, if you look at how many column inches this has secured and how many minutes of airtime and things, if you were registering on that alone, then this has been a massive coup for U2 because people have talked about very little else, Certainly in the industry, I suspect probably a bit more than outside in the real world. But it's certainly rumbled on and things like that. But I just wonder, really, my thought is the degree to which it's sort of damaged the cultural capital of U2 as a band, which I know sounds a little highfalutin, but it's kind of, have they just crossed a mark where they kind of come off looking a little bit desperate in their sort of strategy here and a bit laughable? And that's the thing, yes, there's been a lot of coverage of this, but really I think maybe it's just reflective of the media I read, but a large portion of it has just been kind of lampooning this whole thing, and has not been particularly sympathetic to their cause. And I just wonder how much that will damage their their image as a band, and will make them more of a, I wouldn't go as far as to say a laughing stock, but as Kristelia kind of pointed out, they're probably a little over the album sales thing and much more into the tour sales thing and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's it will be interesting to see how this kind of parlays over, off the back of that, and whether there's been real damage done. Yeah. I don't know that there will be. I think it's easy to be melodramatic about it and sort of say, well, this is it. This is the sort of a mortal wound for the band and all that kind of drama. But I suspect, because they seem to be implying that there's a second record coming, which for committed U2 haters like me is like twice the pain. But
you're going to Dublin in a couple of weeks. Careful there.
On a side note, literally never met anyone in Dublin that likes Bono, and I mean nobody. I mean, I got in a cab and I was last over there to do a thing with somebody, and we drove past U2 studio, and I mentioned Bono, and that was it. And I then got subjected to a 15-minute diatribe from the cabbie about Bono being a tax dodger. And pointed out, for what it's worth, the fact that I never knew, which is like the CEO of Ryanair pays all of his taxes into the Irish economy. So there's a million reasons to hate Ryanair, as you well know, Andrea, but his tax situation is not one of them. So yeah, contrary to most views, every time I've been in Dublin, nobody likes that man. Maybe the rest of the band, I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, too far.
For me, it's mostly a technological issue at this point. I think it's just a case of, it's similar to when, I think there was a case a few years ago when Apple removed an app from people's devices. I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure that's the case. And that sparked a huge controversy as to what Apple could and couldn't do to apps that had already been sold and everything like that. So I think it's more along those lines that I find this issue pretty interesting, because this could happen to a book, it could happen to an app, it could happen to essentially anything that Apple wanted to push. And it's not, I mean, they are doing a similar thing with the Apple TV, because that's not an app ecosystem, so they're just dropping new apps into the Apple TV ecosystem, whether you want them or not. But whether that's something that people are prepared to accept in a different context, I'm not sure. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that proceeds. But enough talk about U2. I wanted to move on to talk about a story that I read on Tech Dirt, which is really good actually, by Mike Masnick, talking about sampling and sort of the issues that people that use samples in music are facing in the US. And in particular, this piece is revolving around a motion to dismiss filed by Jay-Z, who has been sued by Tough America Inc. over a one-syllable taken from a recording owned by the company of a track called Hook and Sling Part 1. So Jay-Z's lawyer's argument is such a sample is de minimis, so it's so short that it's not really actionable in the context of a copyright law, but it's the first time that this kind of that they try to get this principle upheld, and I think in the past most rulings have gone for the owner of the recording, in favor of the owner of the recording. And so it's interesting to see Jay-Z stand up to something like that. And Masnick actually in the article calls this a ridiculous state of copyright law and music samples. So Kristelia, this is your domain. How do you feel about this? Do you think that this is a case that, because of the high profile of the person in question, could actually change things in the US if it's addressed in the right way?
Possibly, and I think you're exactly right. If it's addressed in the right way, I share Mike's enthusiasm in the piece when he says, finally we've got someone who's a big name, and by big name we mean not only that it'll attract interest, but the big name meaning they'll have the money for a lawyer who can actually do something with this. We have a big name who's willing to stick his neck out there and challenge it. As Mike talks about a bit in the article, one of the reasons we haven't seen much action on this since the Bridgeport case that he talks about, this was the 2 Live Crew Pretty Woman case, which is the last real bit we have on anything to do with sampling. We haven't really gotten anything since that. It seems surprising, but the reason we haven't gotten anything is because no one wants the answer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No one wants the answer to go the wrong way. If you're a hip hop artist, you don't want a ruling saying you can't sample at all. And if you're on the other side, you don't want a ruling saying, sure, anyone can sample, right? So people have just said, you know what, we prefer to just pretend like we're right and not know.
Yeah.
But to have someone like Jay-Z step up and with the lawyer power to potentially challenge this is interesting. I think the legal issues here are a bit more involved than Mike highlights in the article. The de minimis doctrine, which is a version of fair use, and fair use is just the term that copyright law uses to lump a whole bunch of things that would otherwise be infringement and exceptions to that, right?
Yeah.
So parodies, because that's free speech, use of this in an educational context, that kind of thing. De minimis is one of them. But the way, at least from what I understand, that Jay-Z's lawyers are arguing de minimis, I'm not encouraged. I say that because what the Bridgeport holding really said, it wasn't so much that the length of the sample you used, which is what I think Mike is kind of, glomming onto in his article. It's whether you used the original master or you record it yourself, right? So say you wanted to use the guitar riff from Pretty Woman. It's not how many seconds of it you use. And this is a common misconception among musicians and their managers, because I speak with them about this all the time. It's not the number of seconds that you use necessarily. It's whether or not you use the original master or you simply re-record that same riff yourself. Right? So you may be able to make de minimis use of, a couple of seconds of something if you record it yourself, but no seconds of anything if you're taking someone else's recording. And, we can laugh amongst ourselves about how ridiculous that distinction is.
Yeah.
But maybe the thought in the law was, well, what copyright does is protect modicums of creativity, and certainly there's no creativity in just cutting and pasting.
Yeah.
But maybe there's some creativity in picking up a guitar and replicating it yourself. Maybe you put a little spin on it. Maybe you don't.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah, but you do some. You take some artistic effort. So at least we've judged that copying and pasting is not an artistic effort. Maybe replaying something someone else has already played could have some sort of artistic, modicum of creativity to it that merits copyright. So I think it would be really nice to see if the lawyers can pull something like that out. And I don't know in this instance if Jay-Z's people recorded this anew in the studio, if they used the exact master.
Yeah.
To me, that's what this case will turn on.
Very interesting. And Darren, I will spare you from this conversation if you don't want to.
I've followed the sort of sample culture, I suppose, from the other side looking in all my life, and grew up around De La Soul, which is now stuck in purgatory on a sort of, they can't release it digitally, and, and Paul's Boutique, the likes of which you won't see again. And that's the thing I think is the sort of saddest element to it is all I think of, through this is like, this is why we can't have nice things. Because people can't do it without completely, going too far. And, I sort of dispute the notion that sampling, if you're just taking the sort of master version and taking a slice of that isn't, that it's not possible for that to be transformative within another work. And I think there's significant sort of works out there, ironically, in the very undercovered kind of world of mixtapes and proper DJ culture from the 90s, where things were mashed together in such a manner. Well, you could argue DJ Shadow's a good example, where that many samples are piled on top of one another that the end result is transformative and is a completely different kind of creative work. But yeah, I think the problem is that, as soon as there's a crack in that for someone to wade in and kind of, not respect that and take the piss by promptly creating a song that's just stolen yours lock, stock and barrel, then obviously these people will come after you. And there's, countless examples of people like Clyde Stubblefield who, played the funky drummer rhythm, getting absolutely bugger all for his, for his effort, despite it being probably the most sampled thing of all time, the same for the Winstons with the Amen break and, all these different examples. So it's going to be interesting to see what the upshot of this is relative to Jay-Z kind of standing up against it. And I have to say, even for me, I was sort of looking at thinking, one syllable. This is starting, again, this is now with the pendulum swinging the other way. We've had people going way too far in sampling and just kind of nicking whole songs, and just putting a rap over it and thinking it's theirs. Yeah. And this is almost the pendulum swinging back the other way, where there's, barely a quarter of a second of a sound and, whatever, and people are demanding money for it, and that just feels overly egregious. So it'll be interesting to see, but I sort of think Kristelia kind of hit the nail on the head. I think there's a definite sense of people being a little bit scared to get a definitive judgment on it, because once that hammer comes down and the precedent's set, then there's a problem.
I mean, I guess it's so hard because if you sampled like a half a second of a Michael Jackson typical sound, you could tell that it's him right away, and so it's just really comes down to also the quality of the sample in a sense. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that turns out, and also what happens if people start doing that with Jay-Z's music and how he's going to react to that.
The other thing I think that makes this a little bit challenging is we get what we call copyright trolls, right? Like Bridgeport, who are going after these 1 second samples that they don't really care about. And that detracts from the people who have genuine concerns about having their music ripped off. And if we could focus on, people with genuine cases and bring a real meaningful case, we could get some resolution around this. And I think that, most reasonable minds would agree that there's transformative value in a lot of songs that involve sampling, and it has to do with a bit of both a cultural and a legal recognition of the value of the creativity in those transformative works. If we can agree, societally and legally to recognize value in those works, we can protect them as such. And a lot of these copyright trolls are just noise that are distracting in the background from what we really should be focusing on. Yeah, and
there was one story, that I thought was hilarious that I read about with the Aphex Twin and Kanye West, where apparently Kanye asked the Aphex Twin if they would be able to use a short slice of one of his songs. And the Aphex Twin replied saying that the way in which they were using it, I think they'd sped it up. And he said that the quality is being lost. So if you like, I'll just resample it for you. I'll replay it at the increased speed or reduced speed, whichever it was, and I forget, so that you'll have it in proper quality. And Kanye's people kind of went back and just went, kind of in a nutshell, they just went, it's fine, we've re-recorded it, so now it's our music, so basically you can fuck off. And Aphex Twin was apparently just like, well, that's what you get for trying to be nice. So, and he didn't do anything about it. I think he just thought the whole thing was really funny that they kind of took this unbelievably arrogant attitude.
Right.
But yeah, I thought it was a great little story, kind of as an adjunct to this whole sampling element and the spectacular arrogance of Kanye West when you mentioned, what would happen if someone sampled Jay-Z,
Yeah, in a sense, there's a lot of parallels between that and the need to reform patent law in the US, because in the same way there's patent trolls that are clogging up the system with all sorts of weird and wonderful lawsuits around patents that probably won't be upheld in court, but in a similar sense, sort of that needs to be addressed too. So we'll see what happens when reforms do come into place. And a short break here as I managed to get Beth Murphy, the CMO of Deezer North America, on Skype just after we finished recording this week's show. So here is a short interview around the Deezer Elite platform. I know we covered it a little bit last week on the show, but it's great to hear directly from them how it all came about. And it's a real pleasure to welcome to the show today Beth Murphy, the CMO at the US side, North American office of Deezer. So hi, Beth, and thanks for joining me. How's it going?
Thanks. Good. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure to have you. And of course, we talked last week briefly about Deezer Elite and the new high-resolution survey that's going to debut internationally and especially in the US on Sonos devices. But first of all, tell me a little bit more about the US office. Sort of how long have you been, or the North American office rather, how long have you been operating?
We've had people kind of in the US for the past year. We've just started staffing up our office here. We're also working on global efforts from the U.S. office as well. So the Deezer Elite launch is basically driven by folks here with the Sonos team. So so we're hiring and we're building up an office. Deezer is already about 300 people and we're in 180 countries. So we're excited about entering the U.S. market, and we really want to do that in a way that grows the category and brings differentiated offers to music lovers.
That's fantastic. And so how did the project, how was the project conceived at the beginning for the Elite side of things?
I think the real driver behind it was that there's a realization that the music streaming space is still fairly modest. There's only 30 million people in the category, but there's still 2 billion people listening to music. So there's a lot of unmet needs, and audio enthusiasts in particular has been a segment that has struggled with the category. We've basically gone backward in music quality from vinyl to CDs and now MP3s, and we really wanted to offer a product that addressed that. And so we worked with Sonos to launch Deezer Elite, which, as you may or may not know, is 5 times the bit rate of what you get with an MP3 file. So it's FLAC, lossless quality, and you can really tell the difference when you're streaming it across your home system.
Absolutely, and obviously, talking about FLAC, I think we're talking about talking to a distributor last week, and the fact that most of streaming services receive the music at a higher quality, and then they compress it down when they pass it on to consumers. And so, is that a challenge from a technical side of things to deliver that stream at a consistent quality without interruptions when it's such high rates?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't on Sonos. I think a lot of people, when we launched, were asking us, do I need a certain high bandwidth connection? And you really don't, which is great. So it's the first time globally that consumers everywhere will be able to have a service that's easy to use, it's plug and play, and there's no buffering. It's not like watching Netflix on a poor video connection. It really does. It's really smooth, and we haven't seen any issues from a QA perspective in terms of consumer listening quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Sonos is an interesting choice, of course, because it's a brand that is huge in the US. It's pretty big internationally, but maybe not as big as it is in the US right now. And so from a marketing standpoint, are you going to play on the hook with the Sonos, or are you just hoping that this is going to catch on organically without doing a lot of marketing around it?
We're going to do marketing around it, but what we really liked about the Sonos offering was that it's what we found when we did market research with audio enthusiasts is that a lot of them wanted higher quality sound, but they really couldn't achieve it and didn't know how to do it. And what we liked about Sonos is that it's an end-to-end solution. So it's very turnkey. And so we wanted to make sure that we were partnering with a hardware manufacturer that really understood that market and really understood and served sort of that segment well. And so that's why we really wanted to launch with them to introduce the product in the market.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so in terms of catalog, as I mentioned, sort of a lot of the catalog that you probably ingested, it was already FLAC. Did you have to make any modifications to that in order to make sure that the majority of all of it was that the quality you required?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of our 35 million song catalog at launch, about 20 million will be in FLAC quality. So that's 90% of listens. Because Deezer is such a large music footprint, there's a lot of long tail songs in there, whether it's Hungarian folk or really long tail stuff that just either A, was never recorded in FLAC, or B, it's just not available. So we're working on sort of backfilling the longer tail stuff, but for the most part, most consumers shouldn't experience some access to something that they don't have, particularly if it's really mainstream. It's just really the long tail where we'll catch up as we continue to launch and market.
Excellent. And so can I ask about sort of the curational side? Because, of course, Deezer has spent a lot of time and resources in creating a great experience on the curation front internationally. When it comes to the Sonos experience, how is that going to be implemented as far as, can people actually navigate that through the Sonos app, or can they play music through the Deezer app onto Sonos devices? How on the practical level, how is that going to be implemented?
Yeah, we're integrated through the Sonos UI. So the way to get Deezer Elite is to go to your Sonos system. We have been getting the question, well, what about my mobile phone? And we'll continue to get feedback from consumers if they're telling us, hey, I really want to stream FLAC from my mobile phone. I think the challenge there is a lot of times when you have your mobile device, you might just have earbuds where you can't hear the difference, or you don't want a big footprint, or you might not have the right Wi-Fi connection.
Right.
So we felt that the home experience was the best place to start and start to get consumer feedback. Yeah. So you'll be able to access all the same features as Deezer. So you'll be able to access radio channels, flow. So you have a full soup to nuts curated experience, whether it's our algorithms recommending music based on your individual listening behavior, or if you want to listen to recommendations from our editors.
That's really exciting, and I think everybody's really looking forward to seeing this high quality market develop. We've seen a couple of other offerings come into play, and of course we're going to see what happens with Pono as well later in the year. But Deezer Elite is coming to the US. Actually, has it already launched, or is it?
Yes, it launched this Monday.
This Monday, yeah, exactly.
So go and grab it.
So it's already out, and I know a lot of my listeners have Sonos devices, so they can definitely go and give it a try and see how they like it. And I would love to hear some feedback on that as well. And Beth, such a pleasure having you on. Please keep us informed, and we'd love to have you back when you have some data around the service.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And moving on, Darren, I wanted to ask you about All J. So All J's new album is out, and it's called.
It's not. It's not.
Is it not?
It's streaming on Spotify. It's technically out on Monday. Yeah.
Technically out on Monday, right? I was sure that I went on iTunes and it said something like "buy it now" or something. Maybe it's just a pre-order, right?
Oh no, they'll take your money. Yeah, but it doesn't mean they'll give you the record. Yeah.
You can always give the money.
And that's interesting, actually, because I equated, that's an interesting point, because I equated the release on Spotify as it being released for retail as well. So that's an interesting assumption that
windowing, yeah.
Yeah, a little assumption that I made there. And talking about that and the fact that, they released essentially they allowed people to start listening to it via an app, a geo-blocked app where people could only listen to the album if they were getting close to a point that was unlocked. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of how that all shaped up and sort of how the response has been in the last few days?
Yes, where I can.
Of course, yeah, where you can,
So it came about because of a conversation that we were having one night where the manager, I believe, was saying that he'd been listening to the record while kind of walking somewhere fairly pastoral. He may have been up a hill somewhere in the Lake District, I don't know. And he kind of mentioned it was just incredible to sort of stand and take in this incredible sort of countryside while listening to this record that has has that kind of a theme to it, I suppose. Yeah. And possibly powered by some gin and tonics, I mentioned that there's a bench in Richmond Park called, well, it doesn't have a name actually, there's just a bench, but the bench was put there by the family of Ian Dury, and the bench it's by this phenomenal view back over, it views east from Richmond Park, which obviously Kristelia may not make a huge amount of sense. So Richmond Park in West London, not far from me. It's curiously high up. And there's a view there that views east over the London Basin, so you kind of view right the way across the skyline, all the way to Canary Wharf and all that kind of thing. So it's a really good view. And it was apparently Ian Dury's favourite view of London, and so his family put this bench in there. And if you sit on the bench, you can plug in your headphones and listen to Ian Dury's music while you stare at the city he loved so much. And I kind of related this just off the back of the mention that the music sounded great with this pastoral view, and it just kind of spiraled from there, really. And I mean, I have to say, spiraled away from me, but in a good way.
Sure,
in that there were suggestions then, that basically there was no logistical way we could install benches worldwide in nice places for people to listen, so that kind of rapidly ground to a halt, which is a shame, because I did say if we were going to do it, I wanted one afterwards for my backyard. I'd have like an old J bench in my backyard. Anyway, and it just went from there. So the guys at Strange Thoughts, who's my old colleague Seth Jackson from who I work with at PS, they kind of developed the idea further, and this idea came together of effectively kind of forcing people, I suppose, to be in a nice environment to listen to the record. Yeah. The band really liked the idea. Everyone loved the idea. And so we went for it. And the response was pretty overwhelming. I mean, when we announced it, that many people hit the servers for the app and everything else, that it kind of instantly took the whole thing out. And it, I think the number was something in the region of 20,000 people trying to access the app in 1 minute. It was like something like that. It was just an absolute
crazy
hammering beyond all belief.
And the cool thing is that people can actually request unlocking it in certain places, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really nice to do. So the initial wave was parks, and we had all parks worldwide kind of there, so people could go there. The second one we put was record stores, because we thought it would be kind of cool to get people into record stores to listen and maybe pre-order, and also just buy some more music while they were there. And then the third was the band and the rest of the team selected various places that meant something to us, I guess, where, we thought it would be nice for you to listen. So we all got to nominate a few locations, and then on the same day, later that day, we asked fans to nominate places that they wanted to hear as well, which allowed us to then unlock some, where, not everyone's that near a park. So it allowed us to unlock things a bit closer to home so these people could go and take a listen as well. Absolutely. And it was great. We got some unbelievably kind of lucid, crazy responses from people. There was one guy on Reddit in the Alt J subreddit who I don't know if he'd taken masses of drugs or what, but basically he'd sort of spent the night sitting in the park just with the album on repeat, and evidently from his ravings on Reddit he'd had some kind of proper biblical experience. It was it really, really, really bent his head. So that one guy made it worthwhile in my book.
Nice.
But no, it's been great to do. I think we all enjoyed the process of doing it. Quite stressful, not going to lie. Rolling these things out is hard. But yeah. I have to say, just for and particularly around Ulche, we are a team. The whole team works as together. Yeah, and on this one, whilst maybe the crazy bench idea was mine, that may have had a tiny hand in the gestation of the idea, the credit should go to Seth and the team at Strange Thoughts, because putting together an app and launching it is really unglamorous, and it's really easy to go, well, the idea was this person's or that person's, but the sheer aggro in then delivering the idea through,
and also delivering it to an audience, that is pretty discerning, and it will pick up on any issues with this.
Yeah, I mean, like everything in the world, people are silent when they're happy, and then very vocal when they're not. So unfortunately, when people are happy, you don't tend to get as much praise as when they've got an opportunity to grumble loud.
Absolutely.
But yes, it's gone really, really well. I think everyone's delighted with it. The campaign's doing extremely well. I note that as of this morning, Alt J songs were occupying the top 10 on iTunes singles for most European countries. Most of them are at number 1. And awesome. On Spotify, the response has been just mind-boggling is the only way of describing it. It's phenomenal. So
that's awesome. And I mean, I wanted to corroborate actually the fact that I got confused, and it's interesting because it speaks to how sort of out of touch I am with actual release dates, is the fact that it was on Spotify, and I could actually, there were a bunch of reviews from all the major publications that came out yesterday. Yeah. And so that kind of led me to believe that the album was out, because usually when there's a review, the reviews are out and the Spotify is out, then it means that the album is out. But no, that's not true. So it's very interesting from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, but equally, to confuse matters further, if you're a more global citizen, there are a number of launch partners. So whilst it's on Spotify in a high number of countries, it's on Deezer in France, for example. Yeah. And if you're in the US, then it is streaming on iTunes. So it's separate again. So
very cool.
It's all over the place. But the main thing really at the end of the day is that the response to it has been pretty incredible. Second album, there's always a potential for those to be difficult for any band, and I think on this one they've really come through. So I'm kind of proud of them, and I think everyone's done well.
That's fantastic, and I loved it. I listened to it a few times already. And moving on, I wanted to talk about Facebook. So Facebook is moving into sort of a slightly more hands-on approach when it comes to video uploading. Facebook would like for more people to upload videos directly to their platform instead of doing it via YouTube and embedding it on their feeds. The Wall Street Journal reported that Facebook has started talks with some of YouTube's biggest content creators to figure out how they would be posting video content directly on the social network, bypassing YouTube, of course. And the biggest sticking point at this moment is the advertising side of things, because of course if you're viewing videos, especially on mobile devices, which constitutes a huge proportion of Facebook content consumption, you don't have space for the usual Facebook adverts to appear on the side of the screen, and Facebook doesn't support video pre-rolls as of yet, although I'm sure there's probably a healthy number of members of the team of Facebook that are looking at this problem and trying to figure out how to implement it. Kristelia, from your side of things, do you think that Facebook can succeed in usurping sort of YouTube's spot as the key player in video, or at least, starting to challenge that by providing an alternative option for uploading?
Yeah, I hope not. And I say that because I say that because what Facebook is effectively doing is DRM, right? They're locking the videos into a particular platform and format, which makes them non-transferable. So while I certainly can appreciate from a business standpoint why they would want to have the videos on their own platform as opposed to YouTube embeds, why should YouTube be getting advertising revenue when they could be getting advertising revenue? I get that. The difference between what Facebook and YouTube are doing is that YouTube does allow its videos to, you can pull them out, you can email them to someone, you can, text it to your mom, etc. Right? You can, it's a pliable, movable medium. The videos which are uploaded directly to Facebook, when you try to do the same thing with them, all it does is send a link to Facebook and force, your grandma or whoever to have a Facebook account and to log in and to view them only in Facebook. This I feel in 2014 is a step backwards in the direction of which we should be going with this sort of thing. Can Facebook be a challenge to YouTube? Yeah, sure, maybe. It's certainly a big company. It has a very large user base. If they give advertisers a good enough rate, they can probably get some people going for it. My inclination / hope is that people will ultimately not pick this up as much as a popular service because of the lockdown. Yeah. And so I don't think it will have the spread that YouTube has. Facebook has been pulling a few maneuvers recently. Those of you who are big users of Messenger will know you now have to have a second app to use Facebook Messenger, because I need another texting app on my phone. If I don't read my high school friends' messages, I'm fine with that. So I don't have the app. But I think the moves that they've been making to keep things on their platform have begun to creep into user imposition. Yeah. And that's where I think they're actually going wrong. I think if you want people to use your platform, you just make it a really good platform. You don't get people to use by forcing them to do things that they don't want to do, like downloads and upload videos directly, and make it unfriendly. Bloggers out there, or vloggers, I think they call themselves, who have things going on YouTube, and to tell them, well, no, you need to, take all these extra convoluted steps and get your videos directly on Facebook, I think just makes it a less friendly platform. Yeah. That's my impression.
That's a wonderful point. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about the embeddability of the content, which is, of course, a key component of YouTube. Darren,
sure.
Did you agree with Kristelia? And you're a big supporter of Facebook when it comes to advertising. So, do you think that there's a way that they can figure this out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points. I mean, I think someone made an excellent point around the Facebook Messenger thing recently, which is that certainly on Android, Facebook is well beyond the limit of what an app should be able to, the kind of the size and the bloat of the app within it once it's opened. They've been actually caught out kind of using backdoor techniques to try and pull in the resources of the device you're using. So in a nutshell, in plain English, I think the issue is that the Facebook app is now trying to encompass so many things. They've hit like a natural limit as to what the app can do. And as such, I think that may have a hand in why they're trying to break this up into a series of separated apps. And the Messenger part may be a case in that. Beyond that, I have to say, Kristelia, I share your view, and I haven't installed it. It really gets on my nerves that I get a notification on Android saying, blah has messaged you, and then I can't read it because you respond to the notification just to land on a thing going, yeah, go and install Messenger. And I have to say, on Android, that Messenger thing is way more intrusive and annoying. So it's not going on my phone. But relative to embedding stuff, I mean, it is possible to embed YouTube videos. You can click on the top right corner and there's an option to embed any Facebook post anywhere on the web. So again, in theory, this stuff can go elsewhere. Travel around. I think just to touch on the advertising point of view, it's proving pretty compelling as an ad platform. I suspect there's a degree to which, as we saw with the mobile ads, that Facebook are probably weighting it slightly so that these ads get far more of a fair shake than or probably far more of a preferential shake rather than other types of ad, because they want to prove that video ads can work. And that's kind of what happened with mobile. If you booked ads and only targeted mobile, you got a lot more serves and a much better response rate. And it just felt like Facebook was trying a bit harder to make your ad campaign work. And I suspect the same is happening with video at the moment. Beyond that, though, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I think Facebook has potentially significantly more ability for a clip to go viral within its own network than YouTube could ever deliver. But I just think at the moment it chronically lacks a kind of genuine structure. And YouTube over the years has really kind of realized that everything needs to be channels, and that there then needs to be a kind of much more organized setup around this. And Facebook is not well placed on that front. I mean, the reality is that Facebook pages are still a horrific afterthought in their whole structure.
Absolutely.
They've not really changed them since they retired default landing tabs 3 or 4 years ago. So they just don't play that big a part, and the stats have it. For any of my artists, probably 95% of views on any post come in the main news feed. They're not on the page itself. The page is almost an afterthought, and the fact that you can now like pages from a post and all these sorts of things means that there's really no reason for people to ever visit them. So within all of that, creating destinations where you have a series of good videos there to view, I just don't see that happening until they make some really fundamental alterations to how the thing's structured. For me, and on a more dull note, as I've touched on in the digest, with these videos being a more powerful way to reach people, and definitely a more engaging platform, and we've done a bunch of A/B tests of promoted posts involving a YouTube clip versus a directly uploaded one, and the directly uploaded one, didn't just beat it; they absolutely smashed it, to a pulp by comparison. With all that in mind, the fact that they're going to introduce things like public play counts on videos and stuff like that will be a good thing, because it will just allow those of us trying to make a case for the viral response to promoted we can present statistics to the response on that now, so that your Radio 1 UK and these people who tend to look slightly more at these metrics may be able to just see that and get a clear picture of the response. So things like that, I think it's coming together, but I think it's got a long way to go before it's going to threaten YouTube in any serious manner. And
finally, I wanted to talk about Pandora. And Pandora had made a couple of interesting moves this week. The first move was to hire an ex-executive from Epitaph Records, Jason Feinberg, who was VP of Digital Strategy at Epitaph, and he is now head of artist marketing at Pandora. So this seems to be a move that is focused towards trying to build a bridge between the platform and artists. This also should be seen in view of the recent deal Pandora made with Merlin that will enable independent labels to push tracks for faster playlisting on the Pandora network, and to get some more stats on how those tracks are being played around the world. And on the other side, Pandora has also done a deal with a network of Lexus retailers in Southern California, and the deal essentially the opportunity will enable Pandora to put together 4 gigs in different parts of Southern California, and they are supported by Lexus, and Lexus is promoting a particular model of car, and they are trying to reach a specific demographic, and apparently Pandora sort of selected the artists that were going to play in a sense as a response to that demographic request. And that makes an interesting point around how those demographic analyses that we're seeing online are going to translate into real life, and people perhaps using those to arrange real life events, not just being sponsors of an event because it's attended by a specific demographic, but actually putting the whole event together in order to appeal to a specific demographic, which is an interesting twist on the whole topic. And Kristelia, from your side, Pandora has a lot of issues. Of course, we talked about them extensively on the show. Do you think that these recent moves with Merlin and having somebody coming in from with a label head, with a label thought process, will help the company sort of redeem itself from some of the faux pas that it made over the last 2 years?
Well, I think both moves make sense from a business perspective. It remains to be seen how much they help, but certainly Pandora is in a situation where it's struggling, legally and expensively with music licensors, right? So it's having battles in rate courts, trying to figure out what rate it's going to be needing to pay on the digital public performance rights. So it's got those battles cut out for it. It's getting a bad rep, like all the streaming services. Spotify, they're in the same bucket about what it's paying artists, right? So it's got that sort of bad PR going for it. And importantly for them, they're still not profitable, right? So despite the fact that they've got, all of these users and is arguably one of the most popular digital or internet radio services, they're still not turning a profit, right? And this is problematic. They may or may not have a working business model. So I think it makes sense for them to, while they are struggling with these other issues with their business models, and I think it's admirable that they're at least paying a nod to the artists who are, providing the content that's fueling their entire platform. Right. And to see them do a deal with Merlin, I think shows that they're recognizing that that what constitutes an artist is a broader swath than just what they're getting in their major label deals. And I think that bringing Jason on is a good move. He's a smart guy. He's worked in the indie label market, and I think that to the extent that he has the relationships with artists to be able to explain this in terms that are relatable and that make sense to them. And I think the most important thing that he might bring to the company is sensitivity and some sensibilities around what artists care about, right? Yeah. So Pandora, while it's focusing on its bottom line and how to get more advertisers, he can remind them about the types of things that artists might want. And Darren can probably speak more to this, but things like the chance to, get more exposure. If people are listening to this type of band, how can I get my music to them? Ways to get, more rotations, ways to get onto more pre-programmed playlists and this type of thing. So, insofar as it becomes an educational process both ways, Jason educating artists on, what Pandora is up against and also educating Pandora on what artists are up against, I hope that it would be a fruitful relationship.
Absolutely. And Darren, we have about 1 minute left before we have to wrap up. Anything to comment on that?
Only that I think it's good to see that Pandora are now trying to be proactive rather than, they've had a couple of years of basically coming across like they're just moaning about what they have to pay people, to be honest, from the artist side. So it's very good that they now have someone who is respected and isn't just a major label suit, I guess, at the risk of being cynical, but someone who will have a degree of respect in certain areas, and just try and build a more proactive side to this, to say this is what we can do for you. And I think those will go a long way. So good on them. I think it's easy to keep bashing people, but around this, they're trying to make an effort to make the right moves, and I think that should be applauded.
Absolutely, and thanks again for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure having you on. And Kristelia can be found on @Kristelia on Twitter. Anything else that you'd like to plug today?
I think that's it. Thanks so much.
Awesome. It was so good to have you. And Darren, of course, motiveunknown.com. And Darren, anything else you'd like to plug before we go?
No, there's too many things I'm working on. My head's spinning. Too many things. I don't know where to begin, so just no one gets any love.
Okay, I'm just going to say go get Alt J's album on Monday when it comes out. Yes. As I realized today. So bad. Go listen to it now, wherever you are. So bad. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for listening to Digital Music Trends. You can find everything on digitalmusictrends.com. Have a fantastic week, and till next time.